With Eli Oken, Conor O'Brien, Jacqueline Klimas and Wesley Morgan breaking overnight. U.S. Navy plane with 11 aboard crashes off Japan. 8 RESCUSED, reports the Associated Press. 8 people were rescued and 3 remained missing after a U.S. Navy plane crashed into the western Pacific Ocean on Wednesday, the Navy said. Story continued below. The C-2 Greyhound transport aircraft came down about 500 nautical miles 925 kilometers southeast of Okinawa as it was bringing passengers and cargo from Japan to the USS Ronald Reagan aircraft carrier, the Navy said in a statement. The Reagan was operating in the Philippine Sea during a joint exercise with Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Force when a twin-propeller plane crashed at 2:45 p.m. Japan time. The cause of the crash was not immediately clear and the incident will be investigated, the Navy said. 8 people were rescued about 40 minutes later. They were taken to the Reagan for medical evaluation and are in good condition, the Navy said. The latest app updates are here. ZIMBABWES Mugabe finally resigns, writes the New York Times. Robert Mugabe, who has ruled Zimbabwe since independence in 1980 and once proclaimed that only God will remove me, resigned as president on Tuesday shortly after lawmakers began impeachment proceedings against him. The Speaker of the Parliament, Jacob Mudenda, read out a letter in which Mr. Mugabe said he was stepping down with immediate effect for the welfare of the people of Zimbabwe and the need for a peaceful transfer of power. Lawmakers erupted into cheers, and jubilant residents poured into the streets of Harare, the capital. It seemed to be an abrupt capitulation by Mr. Mugabe, 93, the world's oldest head of state and one of Africa's longest-serving leaders. How Mugabe clung to power for almost 40 years, via The Washington Post. And how elite plotters toppled his reign, via The Wall Street Journal. Meanwhile, a figure known as Crocodile is poised to take over, adds the app. It's Wednesday and welcome to Morning Defense, where we're wishing our readers safe travels and happy Thanksgivings. Email us at gelman@politico.com, and follow on Twitter at Greg_Helman, at Morning Defense and at PoliticoPro. A programming note: Morning Defense will not publish Thursday and Friday. We'll be back on Monday, November 27th. In the meantime, continue to follow pro-defense issues here. MD Trivia. Today's trivia question comes via our colleague Wesley Morgan. Former President George W. Bush served holiday fare to troops from what U.S. Army division during his Thanksgiving 2003 trip to Iraq? And a bonus question: what holiday food-related fake news controversy accompanied this visit? The first person to email the correct answers to morningdgelman@politico.com wins a mention in Monday's edition. Senate Appropriations releases defense spending bill, reports your Morning D correspondent. The Senate Appropriations Committee Tuesday released its fiscal 2018 defense spending bill, including $581.3 billion in base Pentagon funding, the latest input from Congress's negotiators worked to fashion a final defense spending package. The bill would also provide $64.9 billion to the Pentagon's Overseas Contingency Operations War Account and appropriate $4.5 billion in emergency funding for missile defense, as requested by President Donald Trump. The full defense appropriations bill is here, and a committee explanatory statement is here. A SECONDLOOK at the NDAA, via our colleague Conor O'Brien and Greg. The $700 billion defense policy bill headed to President Donald Trump's desk would boost the military in all sorts of ways, authorizing more ships, more fighter jets, more active duty troops, and a few other things you may have just overlooked. Among those provisions, a new Asia-Pacific Fund, other strategic initiatives, missile defense, surplus firearms, pilot physiological episodes, professional sports and more. The 2018 military pay raise would be the biggest in 8 years, but just how generous would it be, asks Military Times. Congress may have given the Space Corps a start, writes Defense News. And the NDAA would give the Air Force flexibility in rocket selection, adds Ars Technica. Another court halts Trump's transgender troop ban, reports our colleague Jacqueline Klimas. A second federal court on Tuesday ordered the Pentagon to halt implementation of President Donald Trump's controversial ban on transgender service members. The U.S. District Court for Maryland granted the preliminary injunction in a lawsuit filed on behalf of 6 transgender troops by the American Civil Liberties Union, which argues the ban is unconstitutional and discriminatory. The ruling is another legal blow to one of Trump's signature military policy changes, one that has been hailed by social conservatives but drawn varying levels of criticism in both political parties and been bottled up in a Pentagon review. But the Trump administration appeals the first ruling by the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia to partially block the ban, adds The Hill. Treasury targets North Korea with new sanctions, reports Politico's Patrick Temple Lewis. The Treasury Department on Tuesday imposed new sanctions targeting North Korea, stepping up pressure on the regime to abandon its nuclear development program. The sanctions come a day after the Trump administration designated North Korea a state sponsor of terrorism, adding the Hermit State to a list that includes Iran, Sudan and Syria. North Korea was previously added to the list of state sponsors of terrorism in 1988 and removed from it in 2008 amid nuclear negotiations spearheaded by former President George W. Bush. China opposes the unilateral sanctions, reports Reuters. North Korea launches its latest tirade, calling Trump a mean trickster and human reject, via The Washington Post. Relisting North Korea as a state sponsor of terrorism could damage diplomacy, writes the NYT. And the Pentagon is investigating the behavior of some military communications personnel on Trump's Asia trip, reports The Washington Post. War report, Trump and Putin talk Syria, reports CNN. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke for a little over an hour Tuesday morning, discussing a range of pressing international concerns a day after Putin met with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, a White House official told CNN. The two leaders discussed the situation in Syria and terrorism more broadly, the official said, as well as the state of affairs in Afghanistan, Ukraine and North Korea. The White House was expected to release a full readout of the call later Tuesday. Trump cedes post-war planning to Putin, writes Politico's Michael Crowley. And Russia's not likely to give up involvement in Syria, adds the app. Afghanistan airstrikes spike while anti-ISIS ones drop, reports Military Times. The number of weapons released in Afghanistan hit its highest monthly point in nearly 7 years in October, and the total number of weapons released this year is on track to nearly triple over 2016. At the same time, the number of weapons released against the Islamic State fell precipitously in October to the lowest point since October 2014, the third month of Operation Inherent Resolve. The statistics, released Tuesday by the U.S. Air Force's Central Command, are a sign of how quickly the war against ISIS is changing in the wake of several costly defeats for the militant group. Meanwhile, Afghan leaders in Helmand criticize U.S. airstrikes on Taliban drug labs, via The Washington Post. Iraq waits to declare final victory over ISIS, via Reuters. Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi said on Tuesday Islamic State had been defeated from a military perspective, but he would only declare final victory after his militants were routed in the desert. Iraqi forces on Friday captured the border town of Rawa, the last remaining town under Islamic State control, signaling the collapse of the group's caliphate proclaimed after it overran much of Iraq's north and west in 2014. Securing desert and border areas is what remains in the campaign against Islamic State, military commanders say. But Defense Secretary Jim Mattis warns against counting ISIS out, via the Christian Broadcasting Network. Meanwhile, a truck bomb kills at least 32 people in an Iraqi town, adds the app. And Iraq relocates hundreds of foreign wives and children of suspected ISIS militants to Baghdad, Reuters reports. Dutch defense attaché eyes F-35s, he tells our colleague Andrew Han a newly available defense fund may allow the Netherlands to purchase more F-35 Joint Strike Fighters, according to a Dutch defense official. I'm almost sure that if we have more money to spend, we can buy more airplanes because everyone knows we need more, said Commodore Paul Huber, the Dutch defense attaché in Washington. TopDoc, CSBA urges focus on electromagnetic warfare, via your Morning D correspondent. The Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments is urging the Pentagon improve its ability to conduct electromagnetic warfare to counter Russia and China's gray zone capabilities. Both Russia and China have deployed advanced long-range sensor and weapon networks along their borders, the center notes in a new report. And, it adds, those capabilities have influenced Russian aggression along its eastern border as well as China's militarization of the South China Sea. Making moves, Trump taps Beyer for Navy installations. Post the president has picked Phyllis Beyer to be Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Installations, Energy and the Environment. She has been Chief of Staff in the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Readiness and must be confirmed by the Senate in her new post. Mark your calendar. Politico is partnering with women-owned businesses in the DC metro area to offer a full week of exclusive perks in conjunction with the 5th Annual Women Rule Summit. Join the fun at participating businesses during Women Rule Week, November 27th to December the 1st, for exclusive deals, and tweet 5x using Women Rule for a chance to win 2 free tickets to the summit on December 5th. Listen to the latest Women Rule podcast featuring Glamour editor-in-chief Cindy live here. Speed read: the UN Yugoslav War Crimes Tribunal convicts Bosnian Serb military chief Gen. Ratko Mladic of genocide and crimes against humanity and sentence him to life in prison. App. The Coast Guard's floating Guantanamo's NYT magazine. North Korean troops violated truce while chasing defector, UN command says NYT. Dramatic video shows North Korean soldier making a run for freedom. The Washington Post. How researchers figure out North Korea's nuclear secrets. The Washington Post. Lockheed Martin is praised at the Pentagon for its naval ballistic missile defense. Bloomberg. The military finds additional remains of Sergeant LaDavid Johnson in NigerMilitary.com. Marines are being investigated for allegedly yelling racial slurs in a Snapchat video. Washington Examiner. The Pentagon's hurricane relief effort is nearly over in Puerto Rico, but some missions remain. The Washington Post. Russia goes after an international chemical weapons watchdog. Reuters. Top advisors are urging Trump to ship Ukraine weapons. BuzzFeed. Britain's defense review is delayed by its leadership shake-up. Defense News. Turkey expects its S-400 surface-to-air missile system by 2019. Reuters. The lives of those who stayed in Damascus, Syria. NYT. Lebanon's prime minister is home after his strange resignation, but the political crisis is not over. The Washington Post. Could Yemen's women help end its war? The Independent. The U.S. kills more than 100 militants in Somalia. Defense News. Searchers race against time to find the missing Argentine submarine WSJ. The U.S. will retry a former Blackwater guard for his role in a Baghdad traffic circle massacre. The Washington Post. Explaining CBO discrepancies in nuclear weapons cost estimates breaking defense.